Hello. My name is Vincent David. I'm the editor of Spartacist, the newspaper of the International Communist League. I want to touch briefly on the recent events happening in South Korea, where we actually have some comrades visiting. We published a recent statement titled South Korea to Defend Democratic Rights, Break the U.S. Alliance. I want to explain this, our angle, a little bit. So, the attempt to impose martial law has obviously been defeated, but South Korea's crisis is far from over. There are millions of people protesting to demand the departure of right wing President Yoon Suk Yeol, and making clear that they do not want a return to the military dictatorship. And the proceeding to impeach Yoon has been ongoing at the moment. However, a successful struggle to really defend democratic rights in South Korea requires understanding what lies behind the repression and the reaction, what lies behind this attempt to impose martial law. And the root cause propelling the country towards disaster is South Korea's alliance with US imperialism. So, for more than 75 years, South Korea served the US as an anti communist bastion in East Asia. And so, following the Korean War and years of military dictatorship, really based on strong anti communism directed at the North, and as the Cold War wound down in the late 1980s, and amid widespread protest against the US backed dictatorship in South Korea, Washington decided that the chokehold on the masses could be loosened, without really endangering private property, without really endangering the interests of the capitalist conglomerates which rule Korea. And so they opted to adopt a democratic facade in the late 80s. And South Korea was then fully integrated in the US dominated liberal order, and the country became a beneficiary of globalization while also remaining dependent on and oppressed by imperialism, as shown, for example, in the impacts of the 1997 and 2008 economic crisis on the country, which were quite devastating. Now, however, the US world order is unraveling. And to seek to counter this, the US has embarked on a course to frontally confront its chief rival, China, as well as Russia. And South Korea is a key frontline state in this new drive. And South Korea is being squeezed more and more. So on the military side, this has meant the deployment of advanced U.S. weaponry against China, South Korean military equipment sent to Ukraine, stepped up war games against North Korea, and generally a pressure for ever increasing military spending. And economically, pressure from Washington has led South Korea to greatly reduce trade with China. There's a record 18 billion deficit as a result of this. And this already fragile economy promises to be hit even harder by Trump's coming protectionism. So the U.S. drive against China is really the central factor at the source of all the contradictions and the polarizations in South Korean society, and really bringing the system towards a breaking point. So the Biden administration in the U.S. criticized Yoon's martial law declaration attempt because they were concerned that he was overreaching and he was really sort of destabilizing a crucial ally of the U.S. in the region. However, this shouldn't blind anyone to the underlying dynamics. The circumstances that allowed South Korea's period of economic growth and also democratization throughout the 90s, the 2000s, really have come to an end. And the pressure towards a reactionary crackdown can only heighten. The return of Trump means that the screws will turn ever tighter on South Korean, and the South Korean capitalists will be impelled to launch deeper attacks on democratic rights as well as the very militant trade union movement in the country. So the anti-union protests have prominently included strikes by the KCTU Union Federation, as well as a lot of youth born well after the previous military dictatorship. So it's obvious that Yoon must be brought down. But the removal of one particularly right wing president cannot address the social catastrophe facing South Korea. And the problem is that the main force that protesters look to as an alternative is itself also tied to US imperialism, which is the source of this drive towards reactions. So the KCTU Union Federation and other protest leaders are pushing uh, against Yoon's People Power Party to be replaced by South Korea's other major capitalist party, the Democratic Party, the DPK. And the DPK is completely also loyal to U.S. imperialism, as was shown clearly when Moon Jae-in, his leader, welcomed the addition of American THAAD anti-missile launchers against China during his terms, as well when they were in power. Labor leaders of KCTU were also arrested and imprisoned under the DPK, just as they are under the PPP today. And so resolving the crisis in the interests of the working masses really requires a political break with the DPK and the smaller liberal and populist outfits, which are act as sort of a satellites around this party. And all these forces cannot solve the social and economic disasters facing the country because, like the right wing, they are beholden to the South Korean capitalists and, crucially, to their US imperialist overlords. And so, to fight for democratic rights and advance the interests of South Korean workers and poor require forging a proletarian anti imperialist front that connects the struggle against the domestic exploiters with that against US imperialists, which is really ultimately the force that calls the shot in this entire region. Historically, it was the United States which divided the Korean nation at the cost of over 3 million people killed before and during the 1950-1953 Korean War. And 7 decades later, nearly 30,000 American troops remain stationed on the peninsula. And the US has really ultimate operational command over the South Korean military. To fight reaction in South Korea and throughout the region, it's necessary to unite the working class in struggle. And the starting point must be opposition to the US led offensive against the worker state in China and North Korea. Defense of these states against imperialism is absolutely key as starting point. However, at the same time, it is necessary to oppose the Stalinist regimes that rule in Beijing and Pyongyang and whose nationalist program undermines the fight for the revolutionary reunification of Korea and for international socialist revolution. The historical task really in Korea for the revolution is really its reunification. And the key question is, on what basis will this reunification happen? Under a capitalist counter-revolutionary basis, on a really revolutionary basis, which would sweep away capitalism in the South, as well as the parasitic, bureaucratic, and brutal regime of the North. So various groups on the South Korean left do oppose the Democratic Party, and they do criticize KCTU leaders for forming alliances with other bourgeois forces. But they never connect this question to the central issue of the US alliance, which is what has always shaped the economic and political developments in South Korea and is now honestly driving the country towards ruin. And far from opposing the US offensive against China, many on the left actually equate China with the US, claiming that China is an imperialist country. And some even argue that raising anti imperialism in South Korea represents a capitulation to the liberal wing of the bourgeoisie and the Stalinist ruler in China and North Korea. And these positions are false to the core and can only mislead the working class. I did an entire video on why China is not imperialist or why it is not capitalist. I'll put the link in the description. So the key question is for revolutionaries, how can workers be broken from illusions in the liberal wing of the South Korean capitalist class? And this will never happen through abstract slogans or schemes which ignore the global development driving what's happening in the country. Because in the end, martial law was really just a symptom. And the underlying illness is the US drive against China, which is dragging South Korea towards disaster with it. A fight to break the alliance with the US is necessary to defend even the most basic democratic rights, as well as to defend other gain wrested through struggle over the past 4 decades. The urgent task for socialists is to bring this central question to the fore and to ask point blank to all the forces that claim to defend democracy, which side are you on, the US or the working class? And so we raise 4 slogans. We raise break the US alliance, all US troops and bases out. Oppose the US led drive against China and North Korea. 3. Down with Yoon Suk Yeol and the PPP, no support to the Democratic Party. And 4. Build a proletarian anti imperialist front against US imperialism and South Korean capitalism. And so this is the program we've proposed in these various demonstrations, and to turn this movement from only a movement to support another wing of the capitalist class into really a movement that can really change the trajectory of South Korea and advance the unity of workers in the region against the main oppressor, US imperialism. Like and follow for more, and stay tuned for more articles on South Korea, as well as the broader conflicts looming in Asia.